Today's message is from John chapter 5, verses 16 to 30. Now, the beginning of today's passage obviously shows that we're in the middle of something. Jesus has healed a man who's been crippled for 38 years, and while doing so, very deliberately made the man break the Sabbath rules of the Jewish leaders, but not God's Sabbath law. As I pointed out in last week's online sermon, it was this act of pushing back against the Sabbath rules of these men that began to touch on the purpose of this whole passage. And this week we see how. The Jewish leaders had strong views on the Sabbath. Some believed that, at least in part, the purpose of creating man was to have someone to keep the Sabbath laws, which Jesus addresses elsewhere. The fact that actually Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. There were even some who held that God himself had to keep the Sabbath laws, and that there were workarounds made so that God could continue keeping these even while he held everything together. Now, Jesus' response to these Jewish leaders is neither flippant nor ill-conceived. Jesus knows how they will take his words, and he speaks them plainly. He says, "My Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working." The NIV says that this was Jesus' defense. What's the saying? The best defense is a good offense. And Jesus made sure to offend. Even accepting the idea that God had previously been seen by the people of Israel in a fatherly role, how Jesus approached this idea was very different. He was saying that because of his relationship to the Father, he was allowed privileges that belonged to God alone. Doing justice to what Jesus says here is going to be impossible with the time frame that I have. But just briefly drawing out the comparisons, the rights, the privileges Jesus refers to will highlight John's overall point, the overall point of the gospel. Jesus wants his readers, his listeners, to know this. Jesus is the Messiah, the one and only who can rescue his people, the people that belong to God, the people that God is calling out from condemnation. And the Messiah is so much more than the Jewish people have been led to believe. He is God with us, the Emmanuel that was prophesied in the Old Testament, that's referred to in the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. What is Jesus saying here in this passage? He's saying that your work can pause for a day to honour God and have the physical and mental break that humans need on this Sabbath day. But God the Father's work rises above that in fundamental importance, and so does mine. Jesus says, my relationship with God the Father is like that of a normal father and son. I am equal in essential nature with him. I am like the son sitting in his father's workshop day after day. What he does, I do too. What I see, I do. He says the Father loves the Son and shows him all that he does. Jesus isn't taking this role for himself. He tells the Jewish leaders that God the Father is active in making this happen. They accuse him of blasphemy, speaking and acting against God. But Jesus says that he isn't acting of himself, on his own initiative. Think back to John chapter 3. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only unique Son, that those believing in him may have life. Jesus is not some rogue independent deity doing things off his own back, but he's acting in obedience and cooperation with the Father. The borrowed imagery is of apprenticeship, as would be common for fathers and sons of the time. This obedience and submission doesn't mean the son is any less than the father, as any human father is the same in essential nature to his son. But a normal son holds a different role to his father. Read Philippians 2 for Paul's perspective on this. His argument about how we as people should show humility to one another centers on the reality that Jesus and God the Father are equal in nature. Equal but with different roles. The humility that Jesus shows in his relationship to the Father, it can only be an example to us because they are equal in nature. In the very same way that we as people are equal in nature to each other, even if we have different roles in society or in the church. He says, yes, and he will show him even greater works than these, so that you will be amazed. For just as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, even so the Son gives life to whom he is pleased to give it. What is the greatest power that we could hold? To dictators and tyrants down the centuries, it has been the power over someone's death, deciding whether to end the life that another person already has. But it doesn't take any real power to end life. The world is full of broken people who have either accidentally or deliberately done this. No. The Son has the power to give life. And this truth is something that we'll expand on it more in a minute, when Jesus himself does. Before that, though, we have something that stands as a challenge to the spiritual and religious across the globe. Verse 22, moreover, the Father judges no one, but has entrusted all judgment to the Son, that all may honour the Son just as they honour the Father. Whoever does not honour the Son does not honour the Father who sent him. There are two truths that will be devastating to any who have not trusted in Jesus for the forgiveness of their desire for self-law, their sin, their falling short of what God has called them to. Any who have not received the new life that only Jesus can offer. The first is that they will be judged. Not by their standard, not by their culture's standard, not by the standard of the guy who told them they were a special little snowflake, which God was super excited about. All will be judged by the standard that Jesus sets. And as he touches on at the end of today's passage, this standard reflects the reality, the perspective of both the Son and the Father. They are united in this. And Jesus refuses to act except in complete lockstep with the Father. That's what he means when he says, by myself I can do nothing. He does nothing by himself, because all that he does is alongside the Father. And when the Jewish leaders challenge him, they also ultimately challenge the will and actions of the Father, the one they claim to speak for. The second devastating truth is this. that failure to honour Jesus is a complete failure to honour God the Father. No matter what religious beliefs one holds, no matter what spiritual guru one respects, no matter how kind, helpful, generous, loving or amazing a person is, if Jesus isn't honoured, God doesn't accept it. This is the Jesus revealed in the words of those who walked with him, sat at his feet, and encountered him after his resurrection. This is the Jesus that has to be honoured. My friend, the ex-Mormon that I've mentioned before, he's generous to a fault and is the kind of friend that everybody should have. But our conversations constantly come back to this. It doesn't matter how good we are, because it can never be enough. God the Father cannot and will not accept those who do not honour the Son in the way that he demands. What does that mean? In the next chapter we see these words. Then they asked him, "What must we do to do the works of God?" The work God requires. Jesus answered, "The work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent." Now, if these things are not true, then either Jesus was a liar, or those who followed Jesus, who wrote down his words, were willing to die for a message that they knew was false. The Jewish leaders accused Jesus of blasphemy, but his counter is it is they who are failing to honour God in the way that they should. Jesus' words here speak to another fundamental truth. By saying that he and the Father are so perfectly in communication and agreement with one another, he is also showing that if we want to know what God is like, we have to look at Jesus. Not the Jesus of popular culture, the distorted, just love everyone Jesus, but this Jesus. The Jesus who in the next chapter will willingly and knowingly rid himself of those who are following him only for the miracles he can perform, for the food he can create, or out of some shallow sense of curiosity. The same Jesus who the chapter after that will teach his disciples to judge with righteous judgment. Very truly I tell you, whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life, and will not be judged, but has crossed over from death to life. Very truly I tell you, a time is coming and has now come, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For as the Father has life in himself, and so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself. And he has given him authority to judge, because he is the Son of Man. Do not be amazed at this, for the time is coming when all who are in their graves will hear his voice and come out. Those who have done what is good will rise to live. Those who have done what is evil will rise to be condemned. Here is where we'll end, though there is a lot in this passage to explore. The fact is that I stood guilty, condemned because of my sin. But my debt was paid through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And I will not be forever separated from God, from everything good, from everything that brings joy. God gives our life. Our beating heart and the breath that we breathe are from him, but Jesus offers something beyond that. He speaks of those who believe in him having moved from judgment, being found guilty, from death to life. This picture is of breathing human beings with beating hearts, walking around as dead people. Because they are not merely troubled by sin, but dead in it, utterly separated from God. Accepting the good news that Jesus paid the price for our rebellion through his death, and that he rose from the dead because the power of both death to hold us and sin to destroy us were broken. Accepting these means nothing less than becoming truly alive. Alive to God and alive with him forever. Even when our bodies fail, our hearts beat their last, our breath escapes for the last time from our lips. What Jesus offers is the knowledge that the grave cannot and will not hold us. When he calls, we will come to him. But as always, there's that question of, so what? Why do we need to hear all this? So that we do not become complacent with the gospel, the message of Jesus. The good people that we live next to need to hear that to be with God means honouring the Son. The Son revealed in the New Testament scriptures. The churchgoer who has faithfully given their whole life to participating in the church community must be aware that apart from the Son, none of it means anything. To honour God means to honour the Son that he sent. Our children and grandchildren stand condemned already, regardless of how that makes us feel, until they believe in the one the Father has sent. Not a caricature of Jesus, but the Jesus revealed in the pages of the Bible. And we speak these words not because we are better than anyone else, but because we have seen that it is true for all, including ourselves. We give this message not because we hate, but because we love. We do this because we seek to honour the Son, and because it is what he has called us to. Amen.